This media is brought to you by Polyscope.
In the realm of tomorrow, where techniques mind, we ponder, we dream.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to finally meet you because so we meet each other nowadays over Zoom. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, my name is Jillian Reilly, and I'm the author of an upcoming book called The 10 Permissions and the founder of the organization that's going to offer support and services around that. And I guess I would say profound change and really unlock and dial up their own innate ability to do that. My entire career has been about being present with people as they try to find their way through change that they wanted to make, change that they had to make. And I've seen firsthand how challenging it is. But also at the same time, how capable we are of, driving our own evolution, creating our own path. So, at this moment when I think we're all being confronted with how are we going to navigate the next decade, what it's going to look like, and how we sort of find our own way through it. I'm really passionate about helping people do that in a way that not only brings them security, but also satisfaction.
Now, this is something that I've talked about for a long time, is that we really do fear change.
Mm.
Change is something that really we go to almost any length to stay away
Yes,
from change. It's like
absolutely
so
crazy.
how do we but at the same time there's things that we want to change about ourselves. So
Mm.
how do you deal with that dichotomy?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, as I said, I saw firsthand, I was my background is in social change. I was, for instance, in Zimbabwe in Southern Africa in the middle of the world's biggest HIV/AIDS epidemic and, trying to get people to change their long-standing behaviors. And you would think in the face of a major threat, we would change and adapt quickly. But as you said, it's precisely the opposite. We tend to kind of double down on the known and familiar because we perceive it as a threat to our status and to our security. So, one of the things that I'm talking about in the book is really kind of focusing on our change readiness, not waiting for a problem that we feel we have to respond to in order to suddenly make significant changes to our lives, because that's what, of course, always happens. And then at that point, we don't have any what I would call muscle to
Mm.
make different choices. We've never done it in our lives, and yet all of a sudden we've got to make some profound change to how we work or how we live. So I think one of the necessities right now is really working on your own receptivity, curiosity, adaptability on a routine basis in small ways. In the book, I talk a lot about agency. And that was one of the themes that came up for me a lot in my own work was people's own sense of power to
Mm.
make their own choices, to make different choices. And it sounds really straightforward, but it isn't. Most of us sort of outsource our agency to our family or our company or our community, but really kind of locking into your own ability to make choices. And I would say starting with some small ones and becoming hugely self-aware of how you deal with the new, how you deal with the different, how you handle things at kind of low consequence levels so that you begin to develop a greater capability to deal with some of the higher consequence decisions when you have to make them.
When you talk about a low consequence decision, can you give us an
Mm.
example?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sound really stupid, but I talk to people about like using their weekends because we always sort of focus in on work and job and life and those big things. And these are things that we're not going to make changes to quickly. So I describe weekends as a wonderful place to kind of
Mm.
really exercise your agency. What do I want? And that can be as simple as what do I want to do on Saturday morning to what do I want to have on my pizza? And, it sounds really silly, but, I work with people who are trying to decide what their purpose is, but they look at a menu and can't decide what they want to eat for lunch. And it's like,
Right.
if you are not tapped into any sort of inner voice that you trust, or first of all, that you even listen to, but second of all, that you trust, that you start listening in to that simple question of what do I want? And then you start to respond to it, you start to act on it. It doesn't mean you always get what you want, but it does mean that you become conscious of your own sense of, your inner locus of control, your inner motivations, your inner voice. Because I think one of the challenges when we're faced with high consequence decisions that we're looking all around for people to tell us what to do.
Mm,
And we don't often trust our own sense of what's right or wrong. So, I see those basic choices that nobody needs to know about that aren't going to lead to you being fired or, having to move house as really important spaces to just create the basic capability within yourself to make intentional choices.
right. And then once a lot of times when those are really inconsequential, then
Mm.
is it easy to keep them going, right? If they're really inconsequential?
I think that voice starts to become harder to ignore.
Hmm.
I think, it starts to speak up a little more. And you get a little bit more aligned, if you will, to this own sort of inner sense of desire and direction, because that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about desire and direction is I'm prepared to sort of drive my path through tremendous change, through lots of options. And I think that's what's happening right now is that we've got, as you say, lots of choices that we might want to make. We have more choice than ever before, and we're completely overwhelmed by it at a life level, at a sort of day to day level. And we are looking out at a world that's promising to force us to make some choices that are going to feel very strange, right? They're not going to feel safe. You're not going to be able to make a safe choice potentially within the next decade about what you want to do or, what your next step is. So the more that you have some, first of all, self-awareness of how do I cope when I start to feel, uncomfortable, afraid, uncertain. And obviously, you need to kind of scale up. You need to start to put yourself into slightly higher consequence situations over time. But I do believe that it is like a muscle that once it starts getting exercised, it starts to kind of drive a little bit more of your behavior than when you've never used it before.
Right, right. So, do you feel that people feel powerless in their lives, or like I was thinking about the sort of the free will versus determinism argument,
Hmm.
where do people feel that they are free to make choices, or do people feel that their life choices are determined by everything that's going on around them?
I think it varies, but I think for the most part, most of us carry a sort of imprinted story of who we think we're supposed to be and how we think we're supposed to behave. And a lot of it is totally unconscious.
Right,
It's a product of our environment. It's there. We slip into it from the minute that we step into a family to, again, a community, to an organization. And because so much of it is implicit rather than explicit, it makes it difficult to deal with because it isn't written down. Nobody hands you a set of directions and tells you how to behave, or what's allowed, but there are all of these sort of amorphous boundaries and rules that for most of us shape so much of what we think is possible and desirable. And a lot of what I'm talking about in my book is kind of elevating some of that to a much more explicit and conscious level, because you might be, and you probably are, carrying around a story that might not serve you anymore.
right,
Some of the things that my parents thought or that I thought were possible and desirable, my kids, will not. And so to get super explicit about, what are these unconscious rules that are shaping my choices and my behavior? And how do I get more explicit and intentional about making them in a world where, we do have a lot more latitude than we used to, but are we using it? Are we stepping into it? Or are we sort of just dragging our feet into what feels like chaos, as opposed to saying, okay, well, if the old rules no longer apply, maybe I'm allowed to make more rules than I'm sort of allowing myself to.
right, right. So one of the things I've always believed is that one of the reasons why people can't change or they have a real problem changing is because of sort of their social connectivity to other people. Like people
Yeah.
expect you to act a certain way
Mm.
because the reality is I could wake up tomorrow morning and decide to be a completely different person, but
Sure.
everybody around me will go, "What's wrong with you, Chris? Why are you not the way you were the day before?" So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Totally.
the drag to pull me back to the way I was is very strong. So, how do you
Oh,
deal with
very much
that
so.
when you're trying to make changes in your life and others are like seeing you differently?
Yeah, I mean, one of the lines in my book is that when nobody else knows you is when you sometimes are getting to know yourself the best, right?
Right.
So, I had that experience. I went off to South Africa when I was 23 years old. Nobody else in my family had a passport. I was
Wow.
supposed to go to law.
You're a
Yeah, I mean,
trailblazer. I love it.
I was like, you don't even know. There were a lot of uncomfortable conversations across the dinner table. And I guess a couple of things. Again, back to that inner voice, when it becomes strong enough and you trust it and you start to accept the fact that you are the authority in you,
Mm,
that's a really important sort of, again, muscle that needs to get sort of exercised and utilized. When you start to have those uncomfortable conversations where people are looking at you a little bit funny, where you don't necessarily have words that satisfy them, that whatever you're saying kind of,
yeah,
I also say that sometimes you won't have words that satisfy people. You won't have a pitch. You won't have a plan that's going to feel satisfactory to their vision of you. And again, that's
exactly.
okay, because one of the things you realize is that approval is desirable, but it's not a requirement.
Mm,
Okay. So once you make that distinction in your life of, I wanted my parents' approval, but the truth was I didn't require it in order to do what I wanted to do.
right.
Um, if I did, if I was asking them for money, if I needed their resource, if I needed something, then that was going to be a different conversation. But I'd figured out how to get myself where I needed to go. And, I didn't require it. It was hard. It didn't kill me. And our relationship eventually found its way back onto course. But the first conversation makes you feel like you want to disappear into the earth beneath you, because you're just like, ah.
Yeah, exactly.
Every subsequent conversation kind of becomes like, okay, I know that I'm not the version of me that you recognize. um so all of these things are about practice. And I would also say to make sure that you have some people around you who might be a little more receptive to the emerging version of you,
Right.
because they can go a long way towards reminding you that, it's okay. You're not rogue. You're not, terribly rebellious. Maybe you're just becoming, something that you need to be during this stage of your life.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think people feel that that's taking a huge risk, especially if you've been in
Mm,
relationships that you
mm,
love to have these relationships, but at the same time you want to change. And as soon as you start changing, then the relationship starts changing, and you might be afraid of risking that relationship. So you just go
yeah,
back to the way you were before. So you have to
yeah,
realize that you need to be able to risk that relationship. And if the relationship is strong enough, it'll stay the way it is. But in some cases, if you really want to change, you may have to break it. It's
yeah,
what's best for you.
absolutely. And that's not selfish. That is about, giving the best value add that you can to any relationship, be that work, be that personal. Because the reality is, if your option then is to go back to the version of you that is acceptable to that person, that will not be a happy version, that will not be a satisfied version, and that
Exactly.
other person will not get the best version of you. So, I think none of this is straightforward, and it all comes with a degree of friction and
Mm,
discomfort. And I think a
mm.
lot of us feel like we don't have the capacity to deal with friction and discomfort. And in reality, we probably have more than we allow ourselves to, ever even explore, or we recoil, the minute that we feel it, because
Yeah,
it
it's so
feels,
hard. It's so hard.
yeah, right. And there's a difference between hard and dangerous, right? Yeah,
Yes.
I would never encourage somebody to, willfully take on a dangerous decision. Again, I'll talk about my Zimbabwe experience, where we were working with women who, were they to approach their husbands with conversations around sex, around that was a dangerous conversation for them, because they
Right.
were very much sort of not supposed to have those conversations in their relationship. So, those were dangerous, and it was irresponsible to even suggest that those would be had. But for those of us who are avoiding something, simply because it's uncomfortable, that's different. And that's,
Mm,
about sort of observing yourself, getting to know what's at stake for you, It's not one and done. It's not like you have one conversation and then you move on. This is a lifetime practice of, working through these discomforts and these challenges, and using my language, giving yourself permission to kind of slowly make your way through them.
So you're saying, like, let's say I do have a big goal, like I want to, make a huge change to my life. You'd start with very small steps towards it, or just start with steps to get yourself used to change, period. Right. So it sounds like what you're saying.
I would say either one of those two. I think
Mm,
some people are deeply uncomfortable with change as a concept and as a lived experience in their lives.
right.
Their sense of identity is very much wrapped up in their status quo, down to, a daily routine. And I think for those people, it would probably make sense to spend some time on the front end, sort of getting to know yourself better, getting to that, working that sort of change muscle and that choice muscle a little bit. Because also, if you make one big choice, you get on the other side, and then you're still the person you were before you made that super big choice. You haven't
Right.
actually built new capability. You've just made one dramatic choice.
Right.
So I think some of this, for me, the permission theme is about beginning to frame choice and change as, a routine capability that we exercise regularly, rather than one that we exercise under duress, a few times in our lives.
Yeah. When something
Which,
major happens, because that's usually what happens, right? Something
that's
major
what
happens
happens.
and it forces you to change your behavior, right?
That's right. That's right. And, in a previous world, in previous generations where change was more irregular, infrequent, perhaps not as, deeply impactful as it is now, it could kind of work, I guess. It doesn't work now.
Mm,
And the basic, kind of what I'm saying is that we all need to be much more sort of fluent and fluid in our own capability to make choices and changes. In my mind's eye, I see a life cycle as being something that's got lots of little, blips and changes and diversions in it, as opposed to the sort of static and then a change, static and then a change. That's not how our lives are going to look, and we need to prepare ourselves for that. So even if you are comfortable with change and you have a very big thing you'd like to execute on, I'd still suggest that you start with small steps. You kind of create the conditions around you to gather more information, to maybe learn some relevant skills or capabilities that you're going to need. I think in a world like we're living in now, it's just advisable to work in a sort of inductive manner, where
right.
you are able to pivot and change as needed, and not presume that you can be kind of, led by an outcome that you think you can see from wherever you're sitting.
Right. So it sounds like you're working on personal change, but you're also working on dealing with change that's coming down the pipe at you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when I started my own work and when I started the book, it was kind of a combination of the two. But obviously, it's coming out at a time when I think we all need to be preparing for change that's coming down the pipe. I think if we're not, this is going to be really painful. It probably, to some extent, will be anyway, which is why that discomfort tolerance is really important. That ability to distinguish discomfort from danger is ever more important, because as we started off the conversation, if you are not sort of at all, feeling like you are getting to know how you evolve, adapt, and change, then you're going to get stuck and scared and be slow to move when required. And so I think that especially right now, this isn't just about, hey, I'd like to sort of drive my own growth and evolution. This is about, I need a set of change capabilities, like personal change management capabilities. That's going to be a key 21st century skill set.
Exactly. Change management is not just for corporations.
No,
You
no,
do,
it's not at all.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's for both, but it's, and I think for any of us who have done change management in corporations, it's like, it's so often you're dealing with people who in their own lives have never ever become sort of, as I say, fluid and fluent. It's like you're not comfortable with it. So how can you be expected to make big changes in an atmosphere that is, hugely high stakes for you? So I think as we move into, a period where there's no going back.
Mm.
I think post COVID, we sort of thought, oh, everything will settle. Eventually, it'll look like it used to. And I think we need to accept with the, advent of AI and the impacts that it's going to have on our lives and careers, that we need to have a different set of expectations about how we will experience change and the ways in which we will drive our own change in the meantime.
That's really interesting. So how would you say that change really affects people? I mean, can they, is it like being a surfer on a wave where you have to sort of jump from wave to wave, or can you actually control some of this?
I think surfing's a great metaphor, because there's an inherent precariousness to it. There's an inherent sort of pattern spotting. There's a sense of feel. There's a sense of intuition that comes into it. I mean, I think that's a great way of looking at it, that you need to be patient, that you need to be prepared to move when the time is right, that you need to always be looking for the next thing. I think that kind of feel and touch and ability to roll with things as they move is a great sort of way of thinking about moving through waves and waves of change, that you will be required to always be looking, to always be adapting to what's coming. You can't just sort of swim out and expect to hop on the next one if in fact it's not the right wave and your timing's not right. So there's so many elements of that metaphor that I think are perfect for this moment.
Yeah, and the other thing that I like about it is that it makes people understand that change, that kind of change is actually immutable. It's like you can't
Right.
control it, because a lot of people are like, I want to control every aspect of my life. It's like, no, you cannot continue to control
Right.
every aspect of your life,
Right.
because these things will occur and you have to be able to deal with them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's when I say it's a 21st century skill set, I genuinely believe that. And I think, not unfortunately, but I think some of what I've observed over the past several years is that as the world has felt more unsettling and unsettled, people have doubled down on control-based practices and habits,
Right.
to make them feel better. I think all of the sort of, the diet, the wellness, the cold plunging, the this, the that, the sense that, I
I'll never
can sort
understand
of
cold plunging. Sorry.
I guess I should, I was just talking about discomfort tolerance. So I guess I should, not assume that there's no, it's not to say there's no benefit from any of it, but it's more of a mindset issue.
Right.
It's, as you say, if your response is to attempt to assert control, um, you're going to have a really hard time, because you're going to be feeling perennially sort of out of control.
Exactly.
Um, you want the boat to crush through the waves, and you need to be a surfer. And that's one of the metaphors, or I don't use a surfer in the book, but I say, what we want to do is keep building a bigger and bigger raft, when what we need to learn how to do is swim, because you got to learn to kind of roll and float and keep going in such a way. And but the issue is that we haven't been prepared to do that. We
Yeah.
haven't been told that's what this is going to feel like. So, it's far more, it doesn't feel as solid and as secure as I think in our mind's eye we expect our lives to feel. And I think that leaves a lot of us feeling afraid, inadequate, and anxious. And part of what I'd love to achieve is to kind of create a collective awareness that, your life is not going to feel like your grandparents' life or your parents' life, where they sort of slipped into a role and held on to it for as long as they could.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make you, inadequate. That means that you're just alive at a time of rapid change and, historic change, really.
Yeah.
So we've got to shift our mindset and expectations.
Yeah, I think what's happened is that we know this sort of
Mm,
intuitively,
sort of.
but
Hmm.
we're not ready to just say, yes, this is the way it is. We still want our little raft of control,
Yeah,
but
100%.
we have to understand that it's not the way it is, and it'll never be like that. It probably will never be like that again.
No, I don't think so. And I'm very curious about the ways that it's going to affect, over time, our set of expectations about adult life. But I 100% agree with you that at this moment we're in this in-between stage where we know what real life is like and is getting ever more so, but we're deeply imprinted with an idea, you know, that our life is still meant to be sort of, linear, accumulative, seamless. And it's like it is almost impossible for you to have that life in a world that's wildly fluid, up and down and disruptive. So
Exactly.
using my language, can we give ourselves permission to let go of a set of 20th century expectations for our lives in a 21st century world that just doesn't make it feasible or maybe even desirable?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you think about it, I think chaos is like the natural order of the universe, and we've just put
Yeah.
this layer of order on top of this chaos, and we're trying to ride this layer of order when the chaos is starting to break through to the rest of us. We have to learn how to deal with the chaos.
Yeah, and it's not easy. I'm not suggesting that it is. I do think that we're better equipped perhaps than we allow ourselves to experience. As children, we sort of move our way through situations that as adults we judge as chaotic. And it's going to take time for us to unlearn and relearn. And that's where my theme of permission comes in, because it is a lot of letting go, right? It's a
Mm,
lot of sort of, it's okay. I don't need to have the McMansion by the time I'm 35 in order to be deemed successful. And guess what? Maybe the McMansion isn't desirable in a highly fluid world where I need to optimize for flexibility and optionality, and what was once my castle now can be a drag on my ability to actually
exactly.
respond and adapt and create. So I think we will see a shifting set of behaviors and expectations, but we're now deep in transition mode. And I guess part of what I'm trying to do is to um, urge that along with a reminder that it's okay, because this is not anything we've done before, and we need to let ourselves kind of find our way through it with a lot of grace.
Fantastic. So it's time to think like a futurist to see your 2035, 10 years from now. Where do you think we
Hmm.
will be? Do you think we'll be far along this path, or you think we'll still be sort of grabbing on to stability, or where do you think we'll be in 10 years?
Oh, I think we might be far along this path. I think
Mm,
we might that might get accelerated more than we imagine. In the book, I talk about free agency.
hmm.
And I would imagine, a sort of a world of people operating more in a space of free agency where the world is a little bit more of a marketplace in terms of work. I think we will have decoupled our identities from our roles more than perhaps we have now. We will not be, a doctor or a this or a that. We might
Oh,
be
that'll be
people who,
great. I'd love to see that actually.
yeah, I talk in the book about a sort of I can versus I am mentality where people are, and they do them in a variety of different settings, as opposed to, I am this thing and I do that over and over again. And I think we might have sort of also decoupled our concept of work from a single job. We
Mm,
might be working in situations where, we are creating and co-creating for different clients, for different customers in different roles, so that portfolio experience, which is just now beginning to kind of catch on as a concept, I think will feel more and more normal than it does now. If I want to feel truly hopeful and optimistic, I think that maybe we will have found a way to not have to sacrifice personal security for satisfaction,
mm.
that we will have the opportunity and the requirement to decide the kinds of things that we want to do and make, and hopefully the support to do that. So yeah, that was a very optimistic answer for you, because I think we need some of that right now.
Well, I think I'm an optimist in general, and I do see that exactly that's exactly the way things are going, and I think it's going to happen. It's going to accelerate as time goes
Yeah.
on, and there's more chaos. I think the ability to embrace the change and live with the change and work with the change will be the like the top skill set that
Yes.
we're going to need to build.
Yeah. I mean, the people who can comfortably move towards it with curiosity and receptivity and a desire to learn, adapt, and grow will be the ones who are able to surf it. And the
Yeah,
ones who see it as a threat, who are, holding on, as you say, for as long as possible to how it's always been, will be, slow and it'll be hard. And so I think, yeah, I hope that this is a little bit of a clarion call for all of us to start to build that capability within us and see, how it prepares us for what we're already, seeing and what will undoubtedly accelerate very, very soon.
Fantastic. I love this. So if someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
My website, 10permissions.com. My email address is there. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Love to hear from people and kind of how they're experiencing this. My book is out on the 16th of September. So I obviously
Oh,
want to
fantastic.
encourage everybody.
Congratulations. Is this your first book?
No, it's my second book. I wrote a book about my experience working in the aid industry, but this is sort of my first attempt to offer up something that's a hugely usable, very practical, but provocative. I call it like a playbook for you to start to support people to start to shift their mindset and expectation and ways of navigating the world. Yeah, I wanted to create some, very real and very usable. And I hope that I've done that.
Hello?
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Happens all the time.
We'll have to delete that moment.
No worries.
Okay, I think we're just about finished anyway.
Yeah.
But yes, yeah. So it is let me restart. So I wanted to
Okay.
create something that was just a super practical, usable playbook that people could open up on any page and find something hopefully that made sense to them. It's not a big, heavy, ideas-driven book. It's very much speaking to the every person who finds himself right now facing sort of what might feel like an overwhelming amount of change that they've got to navigate. And the message is it's okay. We're all in this together. And, there are ways to kind of shift how you move forward to see the possibility rather than just the threat.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. I put all the links in the show notes so people can go
Great.
directly. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
Talk to you. Bye.
Pixels and philosophies merge and mold, a future untold, unseen.